Welcome to this 365 Freedom Strategy session. Today we're breaking down the mechanics of courageous prioritization and why your biggest business bottleneck is your need for external approval.
It's definitely the silent killer of momentum.
It really is. We are looking directly at the operational friction that it kills traction for so many leaders. Our mission today is to deconstruct a very specific scenario.
The micro story from the materials.
Exactly. The overwhelmed and scattered micro stories straight from the week 5 ThriveTime materials.
Yeah.
We are going to diagnose exactly how founders actively, though maybe, unconsciously, sabotage their own progress.
Right.
And most importantly, we're going to define the clear technical boundary between the trap of simply doing more and the massive leverage of actually choosing what matters.
It's such a fundamental operational distinction because when we audit the mechanics of a business, the instinct is almost always to look at systems.
Or software.
Software infrastructure, personnel. We look at those as the primary bottlenecks. But the materials we are analyzing today force a totally different perspective. The argument here is that the most severe restriction on a company's growth is often the psychological posture of the person running it.
The leader.
The leader. When a leader operates from a place of seeking external approval, it doesn't just create personal stress. I mean, it does, but it translates directly into systemic operational failure.
Yeah.
We really need to map out the anatomy of that failure today, and more importantly, the precise structural habits required to re-engineer it.
I think the foundational premise provided in the material just hits hard immediately. It states, and I'm quoting here, prioritization becomes easier the moment you stop trying to please every demand on your time.
That's the core of it.
Right. It connects a mechanical business process prioritization directly to a deeply ingrained human emotional response, which is that desire to please others or, to avoid conflict.
Yeah, avoiding that friction. Most founders, if you ask them about their capacity, they'll claim they feel overwhelmed because everything on their plate is legitimately urgent.
Of course.
But the text makes a very sharp counterclaim. It argues that this urgency is predominantly manufactured by expectations. It's not dictated by objective truth.
Manufactured urgency. I want to really sit with that because we have to analyze the psychology of a leader who functions as a people pleaser. It rarely looks like weakness on the surface, does it?
No, not at all. It usually masks itself as being highly responsive or being a servant leader.
Right, the I'm always available for my team mindset.
Exactly. But why is saying yes the default setting in these scenarios? The text identifies the exact reason. It feels easier in the moment than disappointing people.
There's a microtransaction of emotional discomfort there.
That's a perfect way to phrase it. A microtransaction of discomfort that occurs when you tell someone no. Think about it. Whether it's a key client asking for a feature that is slightly out of scope,
or a vendor demanding an immediate reply to something completely non-critical.
or even internal, a department head escalating a problem that they actually have the authority to solve themselves. Saying, not right now, requires the leader to tolerate the other party's temporary disappointment.
Or their frustration.
Right. Saying yes allows the leader to bypass that discomfort entirely.
But I want to push back on that slightly, or at least examine the nuance here. Because in many early-stage companies, or say high-touch service businesses, pleasing people is essentially the business model.
Sure.
Responsiveness is the competitive advantage. So how do you differentiate between strategic, necessary responsiveness and the kind of people-pleasing that becomes an operational bottleneck?
That is the critical dividing line. Strategic responsiveness is dictated by a service-level agreement. Whether that's implicit or explicit, it's an active choice.
Okay, so it's planned.
Yes. If your business model guarantees a 1-hour response time to critical tech support tickets, and you respond in an hour, that is execution. That's doing the job. The bottleneck occurs when the leader applies that same hyper-responsive standard to internal Slack messages, cold emails, minor administrative inquiries. By saying yes across the board to avoid a second of awkwardness, the leader is purchasing long-term operational chaos.
They're mortgaging their strategic focus.
Exactly. To buy temporary social harmony.
So that emotional need for external approval directly degrades the company's operational capacity. Let's trace how that actually functions within a company's architecture. Information, requests, demands, they naturally flow upward to the executive level.
They always do.
If the leader's internal filtering mechanism is tuned to make everyone happy rather than execute the strategic vision, then every single demand gets a green light.
And when every demand gets a green light, the leader's time becomes the cheapest, most easily accessible commodity in the organization.
Wow.
The text points out that without clear priorities, everything has equal weight. Think about the cognitive load of that reality.
It's paralyzing.
If an email from a vendor about a minor billing discrepancy, a low-level client complaint, and a major Q3 strategic initiative all carry the exact same psychological weight in the leader's mind.
The system is broken.
Fundamentally broken. The brain cannot prioritize under those conditions.
It just results in sorting tasks by proximity or by volume. You deal with whatever is screening the loudest or whatever happens to be chronologically at the top of the inbox.
Right.
Which brings us back to that concept of manufactured urgency. The materials highlight that incoming requests from others are essentially disguised as absolute truths, and that forces the business owner into a chronically reactive state. Let's look at what manufactured urgency actually looks like in a modern tech stack.
Manufactured urgency is simply an expectation disguised as an emergency. It thrives in environments with poor asynchronous communication protocols.
Is it getting bombarded on messaging apps?
Yes. It's an incoming message from a colleague that demands an immediate reply because they are trying to clear their own mental checklist, not because the business will suffer if they don't get an answer for 3 hours.
Their priority is clearing their desk.
Exactly. So they push the cognitive load onto yours with a sense of artificial panic. If a leader lacks courageous prioritization, they absorb that colleague's panic as their own.
They accept the manufactured timeline as objective truth.
They do, and the downstream effect of that is severe. The leader drops the high-leverage strategic work, the work that actually creates enterprise value, to cater to a low-leverage demand.
In a scenario where everything has equal weight, the founder is no longer driving the business. The business, and really everyone adjacent to it, is driving the founder.
Yes. You can spend 12 hours working at maximum capacity, but at the end of the day, the needle hasn't moved an inch on the core objectives.
This really requires a high degree of self-auditing. A leader needs to look at the last 3 actions they took today. Ask yourself, did you initiate those actions because they aggressively advanced primary goals?
Or were they reactions to someone else placing a demand in front of you?
Right. Are you operating the business, or are you functioning as a highly compensated customer service agent for everyone else's agenda?
That leads directly into the specific case study provided in the source material, the overwhelmed and scattered micro-story.
Yes, let's get into that. The materials describe a leader who was drowning in a growing list of commitments. She kept saying yes because it was easier than navigating the friction of saying no.
The symptoms were explicitly laid out. Long days, scattered focus, and zero meaningful progress on the work that actually mattered.
And crucially, she blamed her workload. She honestly believed that the sheer volume of tasks was the enemy.
Blaming the workload is the standard executive defense mechanism. It's a safe narrative.
It paints the leader as a victim of their own success.
A martyr to the grind. You hear it all the time. We're scaling so fast, there's just so much to do.
It sounds impressive in boardroom settings.
It does. But the intervention in this story is where the leverage lies. The text notes that the turning point occurred when they mapped her schedule.
Confronting the raw data.
Confronting the reality of where time actually goes is a brutally illuminating process for most executives.
Let's talk about the mechanics of mapping a schedule at this level. We aren't just talking about looking at a digital calendar to see when your meetings are.
No, calendar mapping removes the shadows where excuses live. When you audit a 10-hour day in 15-minute increments, and you cross-reference the calendar with the actual time spent in email clients, chat channels, and ad hoc video calls,
the illusion evaporates.
the illusion that the workload is the problem completely evaporates.
Because the mapping inevitably reveals that the time is being shaped by external expectations rather than internal strategy. For the subject of the case study, the revelation was that she wasn't a victim of a heavy workload.
She was a victim of her own lack of boundaries.
The chaos was self-inflicted.
She was actively sabotaging her own traction by handing the steering wheel to literally anyone who requested it.
To make this concrete, let's profile this scattered state in a typical executive environment. This is the leader who blocks out, say, 9 to 11 a.m. on a Tuesday to finalize the prospectus for Series B funding round.
A massive task.
The most critical task of the month. But at 8:55, they check their messages. There's a question from the marketing director about a vendor contract,
So the founder answers it.
which leads to a follow-up question. Then a notification pops up from a key account manager asking for a quick 5-minute sync to handle a client concern. The founder takes it.
And suddenly it's 10:45.
The prospectus hasn't been touched, but the founder's heart rate is up, they've solved 3 problems, and they feel exhausted because they've been sprinting for 2 hours.
And that exhaustion feels indistinguishable from valid work. That's the trap. They mistake kinetic movement for forward progress.
It's a profound self-sabotage mechanism
Yeah.
because it allows the leader to feel productive while completely avoiding the deep, difficult, high-leverage work that actually matters.
Establishing boundaries requires the courageous prioritization mentioned in the materials. It requires looking a direct report in the eye and stating, "Your request is not my priority today. You need to handle it, or it waits until Thursday."
I think we need to challenge the premise that workload is ever the actual problem. If we audited the schedules of most leaders who claim to be overworked, would we see a highly disciplined executive executing a vision but just lacking hours in the day?
Almost never.
Right. We would see an unprioritized operator reacting to every trigger.
In almost every case, it's the latter. To fundamentally shift from that reactive state, we have to address how leaders perceive time itself. The materials introduce a definitive statement regarding this. Quote, "Most overwhelm comes from trying to carry more than your time can hold."
I want to spend significant time on this concept. The idea of carrying capacity. Treating time strictly as a finite container with a fixed volume is a stark departure from how modern hustle culture treats time.
Completely. We operate as if time is elastic, as if it can be stretched by sheer willpower.
Or a new productivity app.
Or simply sleeping less. But the text treats it as a rigid physical law.
It is a physical law. An 8-hour workday has a fixed volume. A 24-hour day has a fixed volume. The phrase, "trying to carry more than your time can hold," highlights a physical impossibility.
Yet we see founders attempt to force this impossibility every single day. They try to cram 30 hours of obligations into a 10-hour container.
And when the container inevitably overflows, they internalize the failure.
They blame themselves. They think they just aren't efficient enough or smart enough or resilient enough.
But the resulting feeling of drowning in tasks isn't a symptom of having too much to do, and it certainly isn't a failure of stamina. It's a symptom of a broken sorting mechanism. If you have a 1-liter flask and you try to pour 5 liters of liquid into it, the failure isn't the flask, and it isn't the liquid. The failure is the logic of the operator attempting the pour.
Let's elevate that analogy to an operational level. In systems engineering, there is a concept within queuing theory regarding utilization rates. When a system, whether it's a server network or a human being, approaches 100% utilization, wait times for any new task don't just increase linearly.
They increase exponentially.
Yes. A leader trying to operate at full capacity, carrying every possible task, creates infinite bottlenecks for their team. It's the equivalent of trying to carry 100 loose pebbles in your arms while running a marathon.
That's a strong visual.
Yeah.
If you try to carry 100 pebbles, your attention is entirely consumed by the management of the load.
You're constantly dropping them.
Stopping, bending over, picking them up, readjusting your grip, worrying about the one slipping through your fingers. You are managing the chaos of the items, not looking at the horizon. This is the operational drag of a scattered schedule.
The pebbles represent those 100 tiny manufactured urgencies.
Exactly. The alternative is choosing to carry 3 massive boulders in a secured backpack. The boulders represent the true, heavy, high-impact strategic priorities.
It is undeniably heavy work. It requires intense exertion.
But your hands are free. Your focus is forward. You are managing a heavy but stable load. You have chosen what to carry based on the actual carrying capacity of the backpack, which represents your time.
But let me interrupt there. Because the reality of business is that pebbles exist, and they have to go somewhere, the server goes down, a key employee quits without notice, the payroll system glitches. How does an executive maintain the boulders approach when the operational reality of running a company means fires ignite daily?
That's where executive function and operational maturity come in. Courageous prioritization isn't about pretending the pebbles don't exist. It's about building systems to handle them so they don't reach your desk.
Right. If the server goes down, that's not a pebble, that's a boulder.
It immediately becomes priority number 1.
But if a client has a minor billing question, that's a pebble. The failure of the founder who is dropping pebbles isn't in their physical strength. It's in their failure to delegate.
To build standard operating procedures.
Yes, and to train their team to handle the loose items. If you are the CEO and you are carrying pebbles, you have a structural delegation problem.
This transitions us directly into the technical difference between doing more and choosing what matters. The case study notes a critical realization. Her days felt lighter, not because she did more, but because she finally chose what mattered. We need to draw a very sharp technical distinction between volume and impact here.
We need to aggressively dismantle the idea that the goal of prioritization is doing less.
Yes, please.
When executives hear about time management frameworks, they often assume the objective is to shrink the workload to achieve some stress-free 4-hour workweek ideal. But in a high-performing, competitive business environment, doing less is a terrible metric.
The goal is not reduced output.
The goal is concentrated output. The text explicitly states that the relief came not from doing less, but from doing the right things.
It's the difference between kinetic energy and directed force. You can expend a massive amount of energy running in circles. That is high volume, doing more. It generates heat and exhaustion, but no distance is covered.
Or you can expend the exact same amount of energy running in a straight line toward a specific coordinate.
That is high impact. Choosing what matters.
The materials define this process as deciding what matters and honoring that decision with your attention.
Honoring a decision with your attention. That is one of the highest operational standards a leader can adopt. It requires a flawless, ruthless alignment between stated goals and actual minute-by-minute focus.
If the executive team declares that launching the new enterprise software tier by Q3 is the primary goal, but the CEO spends 6 hours of their Tuesday resolving internal team disputes and answering low-level vendor emails,
CEO is not honoring the decision.
the stated priority is a fiction. The actual priority is whatever is currently occupying the CEO's attention.
Let's explore the operational drag of failing to honor that decision. Let's look at the cognitive penalty of context switching.
It's massive.
When an executive is constantly reacting to everything that feels urgent, they're constantly shifting gears. They move from a high-level strategic mindset for product development immediately into a tactical defensive mindset to handle a customer service escalation.
And then try to pivot back to a creative mindset for marketing copy.
And every single time that context switch occurs, there is a severe cognitive penalty. The human brain has to offload the rules, the data sets, and the emotional tone of the previous task and load up the parameters for the new task.
It is a mechanically expensive process. Research shows it can take over 20 minutes to return to a state of deep focus after an interruption.
20 minutes.
If a founder does this 50 times a day, they are burning massive amounts of mental fuel just shifting gears, without ever actually driving the vehicle forward.
That's why choosing what matters and honoring it creates what the materials refer to as focused movement and real traction. You stay in one cognitive gear. You apply sustained force to a single heavy object until it moves.
We have to recalibrate the definition of productivity.
Clearing a massive to-do list is not productivity. An empty inbox is not a business achievement. It's a maintenance task. Productivity is moving the needle on the core mission. It's the focused movement of the boulders.
Which brings us to the mechanical solution presented in the text. The Power of Three framework. This isn't just theoretical, it's a highly specific, tactical habit.
The directive is, before opening the inbox in the morning, list the top 3 priorities for the day. These are not the full to-do list, they are the 3 actions that create meaningful progress.
The chronological instruction here is absolute. Before opening her inbox, I want to spend time analyzing why the sequence of events is the entire foundation of the strategy. Why is the inbox the ultimate trap?
Because the inbox, and we can include your messaging, apps, texts, all of it in this category, is a chronological database of other people's agendas.
Yes.
Every single unread message is a demand on your time, categorized and prioritized by the sender's needs, not yours.
If a leader opens that database before establishing their own defensive perimeter, their top 3 priorities, they are walking into a crossfire without armor.
The brain immediately begins processing the sender's requests, their panics, their expectations.
Within 5 minutes, the executive's entire day has been hijacked. They've lost control of the trajectory before 9 a.m.
Establishing the agenda before looking at anyone else's is the only defense. But let's break down the limitation of 3. Why 3? Why not 5? Or a robust top 10 list?
Because 3 represents the absolute limit of high-level cognitive focus for a single working cycle. When an executive has a list of 10 daily priorities, they don't actually have any priorities.
They have a wait list.
The limitation of 3 forces a ruthless, painful sorting process. It forces the leader to make hard choices about what they are actively willing to let slide.
Choosing intentionally creates natural clarity because it cuts through the noise. Once you define the 3 things that matter most, the 50 things that don't matter suddenly become glaringly obvious.
It also isolates this focus to a manageable time frame. The materials emphasize 1 day of focused movement. a 24-hour cycle.
We aren't talking about executing a flawless annual operating plan in one sitting. It's about taking absolute control of the very next rotation of the Earth.
But the trap here is how leaders define those three items. How do we differentiate an action that creates meaningful progress from a maintenance task?
This is where self-deception creeps back in. Leaders will write down three things, but the items will be: reply to the accounting team, approve the weekly newsletter draft, and have a check-in call with the VP of sales.
Those are maintenance tasks. Those are the pebbles.
Yes, they keep the lights on, but they do not build the house. An action that creates meaningful progress is structural. It is finalizing the code architecture for the new software release.
It is writing the definitive copy for the primary sales page.
It is having the difficult strategic performance review that will finally unblock a struggling department. Meaningful progress requires heavy lifting. It requires sustained, focused movement.
If the three items on the list don't make the leader slightly uncomfortable due to the effort required, they probably aren't boulders.
The immediate directive for anyone listening is clear. Map out the next 24 hours. Determine the three boulders before the noise of the day begins. Protect them before anything else.
But identifying the priorities is only the planning phase. The true test of this framework happens in the execution phase, the moment the outside world attempts to intrude.
The text outlines a specific filtering protocol. When a new request comes in, check it against the list of three. Ask, does this move my real priorities forward? If it supports them, engage. If it doesn't, pause and redirect.
That filtering question, does this move my real priorities forward, is a binary yes or no gateway. It is designed to remove all emotional ambiguity from the decision-making process.
It strips away the people-pleasing impulse entirely. The leader is no longer asking, will my operations manager be frustrated if I say no? Or will this client feel neglected if I delay my response?
The leader is asking a purely mechanical question about trajectory and momentum. But the crux of this execution phase lies in one specific word from the text: paused.
When a request did not serve the top three, she paused and redirected. We have to deconstruct the mechanics of that pause.
The pause is the most critical micro moment in leadership. Most reactive mistakes, most instances of self-sabotage happen because of an immediate autonomic response.
You hear the ping of a notification.
You see the red bubble on the communication app, and the nervous system reacts before the executive function can engage. The pause is the deliberate insertion of a firewall between stimulus and response.
In that 1 second of hesitation, the leader shifts from being a reactive organism to a strategic operator. The pause allows the filtering question to run its diagnostic program.
Let's look at the dual function of those top three priorities. They guide the yes and they guide the no. They serve to protect focus. I think we need to walk through a highly detailed, hypothetical boardroom scenario to illustrate exactly how this functions operationally.
Let's model it out. Assume it's 10:30 a.m. A CEO is an hour into deep, focused work on priority number 1, drafting the strategic acquisition roadmap for Q3.
Suddenly, an email marked urgent hits the desk from the VP of operations. A key logistics vendor has an issue with an invoice, and the VP is claiming it needs to be resolved by noon or it will delay a major shipment.
The stimulus has arrived. The manufactured urgency is incredibly high, backed by the authority of a VP. The old, scattered version of this CEO would immediately drop the Q3 roadmap
Open the accounting software, call the VP, call the vendor.
and spend the next 90 minutes putting out the fire.
Yeah.
The CEO would feel very productive, heroic even, but they just abandoned their actual priority.
And they just trained their VP of operations that the CEO is the ultimate safety net for logistics issues, ensuring the behavior will repeat.
But now, the CEO has the filtering mechanism. They see the email. They execute the pause. They do not touch the keyboard. They look at their list of 3. Is resolving vendor invoice discrepancies on the list?
No.
So the diagnostic question is applied. Does this email move my real priorities forward?
The answer is an objective, mechanical no. It is a maintenance issue, not a progress issue. It belongs to the VP of operations. So the CEO uses the 3 priorities as a shield.
They redirect the interruption.
They do not ignore it. Ignoring it causes organizational anxiety. They redirect it. They reply to the VP. Received, I am in focused work on the Q3 roadmap until 3 p.m. You have the authority to resolve this invoice discrepancy within standard parameters. Brief me on your solution at our 4 p.m. sync.
The CEO has deflected the pebble. They protected their focus. They enforced a boundary. They empowered their executive team.
And they did it without guilt, because the list of 3 provided the objective authority to say no.
That specific micro-habit, the pause, the filter, the redirection, dictates the entire trajectory of a business. When the next ping happens, the discipline is to freeze. Let the executive function override the autonomic nervous system. Check the list, run the filter.
Doing this once is an interesting experiment. Doing it every day is a structural transformation. Courageous prioritization is a daily discipline. The source material is very clear on this point. Quote, "Courageous prioritization is a practice. It requires honesty about your time and commitment to your direction."
Honesty and commitment are heavy words in an operational context. We discussed earlier how founders often blame their workload, which is a form of operational dishonesty.
Leaders routinely lie to themselves about how much capacity they actually have, and they lie to themselves about what they are actually accomplishing when they mistake motion for progress.
Honesty means looking at the carrying capacity of the organization with cold, clinical objectivity. It means admitting that you cannot execute 50 priorities simultaneously.
And therefore, some secondary initiatives are going to fail, be delayed, or disappoint someone.
Commitment means the leader is actively willing to let those minor things fail in order to ensure the major strategic objectives succeed. It means when the top 3 priorities are written down, they are not suggestions. They are the governing laws for the next 24 hours.
And that level of honesty and commitment yields incredibly fast results. The timeline mentioned in the materials is striking. Within a week, her days felt lighter.
It didn't take 6 months of intense operational restructuring or hiring a new layer of middle management.
It took 5 business days of consistent filtering. We have to contrast this rapid return on investment with the chronic, agonizing pain of the scattered approach.
The scattered approach is operational attrition. It's a slow death by 1,000 cuts. Leaders endure months or years of exhaustion, constantly feeling behind, constantly feeling like the primary bottleneck in their own company.
And the cure, simply letting the top 3 priorities completely shape the schedule, takes less than a week to produce a noticeable physical relief.
That relief is the absence of cognitive overload. It is the lightness that comes from knowing exactly what you are doing, and, more importantly, knowing exactly what you have actively chosen not to do.
The ultimate shift is surrendering the illusion of total control over every minor detail and claiming absolute authority over the 3 things that actually drive enterprise value.
The danger is treating this as a one-off life hack. A leader can't just apply this discipline on a Monday, feel the relief, and then coast back into reactivity for the rest of the month.
It is a fundamental operational rhythm that requires daily resetting. The dopamine withdrawal from not being the reactive savior who answers every email instantly is real. Every single morning, the board must be wiped clean. The leader sits down before the inbox, audits the landscape of the day, and chooses the 3 boulders again.
It's a rhythm of continuous realignment. The demands from the outside world will never stop. The manufactured urgency will never cease. The market, the executive team, the clients, they will continually attempt to hand the leader their pebbles.
The only defense is the daily, rigid discipline of the 3 priorities.
You hold the ultimate authority over your own attention. No one can steal it without permission. You must build the structural walls around your time, or someone else will inevitably build their agenda right on top of it.
The leverage is entirely in the hands of the person setting the daily priorities.
As we wrap up this analysis, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. We have mapped out the mechanics of this discipline over a 24-hour cycle and a 1-week timeline. But extrapolate that out. Consider what your business, your revenue, and your own operational capacity would look like in a single month if you completely abandoned the need to appease everyone else's manufactured urgency and ruthlessly honor just 3 daily decisions. If you stack 30 days of focused movement on top of each other, what scale of impact would you actually achieve?
The compounding effect of that kind of traction is staggering. It is the difference between surviving the operational friction of your business and truly leading it.
If you're ready to build a rhythm that supports consistent prioritization, visit 365 Freedom online to join the community. This has been a 365 Freedom Strategy session.